The stump was still bleeding sap when I pulled into the driveway. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the tire tracks in my pasture. Not the wood chips scattered across my grass. Not the orange cones, the sawdust, or the deep gouges where heavy equipment had crossed the ranch road without permission. The stump, 3 feet wide, raw and pale in the morning sun, sitting where my grandfather's oak had stood for nearly 100 years. Behind it, Patricia Vale stood beside a landscaping truck with her arms folded, looking proud of herself. She pointed at the cut trunk and said, "The association finally resolved the eyesore." I did not answer right away. I stepped out of my truck, still wearing the same dusty clothes I had driven home in after cutting my vacation short. I looked at the empty space where the tree should have been. I looked at the old swing rope lying in the dirt. I looked at the slice marks where a chainsaw had gone through history like it was just wood. Then Patricia smiled. "You were warned," she said. That was when my neighbor, Aaron, who had been waiting by the fence with his phone in his hand, leaned close and whispered, "Sam, don't say anything yet. I recorded everything." Patricia did not know what Aaron had recorded. She did not know what that tree was. She did not know about the County Heritage Registry, the conservation easement, the rare bat survey, the signed arborist report, or the letter from my lawyer telling her exactly what would happen if she touched it. And she definitely did not know that the ugly old tree she had ordered cut down while I was on vacation was worth more than the clubhouse her HOA held meetings in. By the time she found out, the mistake had already crossed 7 figures. Now, before I tell you how one oak tree, one HOA beautification order, and one woman's need to control a view turned into $1 million nightmare, you need to understand something about the tree. My name is Samuel Keller. I'm 66 years old, and I own Keller Creek Ranch, 580 acres of pasture, creek bottom, live oaks, old fence, stubborn cattle, and family memory outside a fast-growing town in central Texas. My grandfather bought the first part of the ranch in 1939. He was not wealthy. He was not educated beyond what life and hard weather taught him. He was a fence builder, a cattle hand, and the kind of man who could fix almost anything with wire, patience, and words too rough for church. The ranch was rough back then. Mesquite everywhere. A dry creek most of the year. Limestone under shallow soil. Heat that could split fence posts. Winters that came suddenly and left quietly. The first house was 2 rooms and a porch. The barn leaned so badly my grandmother said it looked like it had heard bad news. But my grandfather loved that land. He planted pecan trees near the house. He dug a stock pond. He fenced the south pasture. And he refused to cut down the big live oak near the western ridge. That oak was already old when he bought the place. Nobody knew exactly how old. The county arborist later estimated it at somewhere between 160 and 190 years. My grandfather simply called it the witness tree because he said it had seen every generation make the same mistakes and somehow kept standing. The trunk was wide enough that 3 children holding hands could barely circle it. Its limbs stretched low and heavy, twisting out like the arms of an old man who had worked too long but refused to sit down. In summer, it gave shade deep enough to cool the ground under it. In winter, it stood black against the sky like a drawing. My father proposed to my mother under that tree. I carved my initials near the base when I was 13 and got whipped for it because my father said you do not mark what already belongs to history. My wife, Laura, loved that tree. When our daughter Rachel was little, I hung a rope swing from one of its lower limbs. Rachel spent half her childhood under that oak, barefoot, dusty, laughing so hard the cows would lift their heads and stare. When Laura passed 6 years ago, we held the family gathering beneath it after the service. I remember standing there with a plate I did not want, listening to people talk softly while sunlight moved through the leaves. That tree had shaded weddings, funerals, birthday picnics, cattle work breaks, and 3 generations of Kellers pretending they were not tired. It was not just a tree. It was the place where our family's life had gathered. Then Briar Ridge Estates arrived. The developers bought the old McCall pasture that bordered my western fence line and turned it into a luxury-gated community. Smooth roads, brick homes, walking trails, a pool, a clubhouse, a stone entrance, and promotional language that made cow country sound like a spa. Premium ranch view living. That was the phrase in their brochures. Premium ranch view living. They loved the ranch when it sold houses. They loved my ridge, my pasture, my tree line, my sunset, my cows in the distance, my old windmill, my fence posts, my family's work, all of it. They just did not love that I owned it. At first, I had no trouble with the residents. Most waved. Some took pictures of the sunset. A few brought their children near the fence to look at the horses. One man named Aaron Pike introduced himself properly and asked if his daughter could sketch the old oak from the walking trail. I told him she could. Respect goes a long way with me. Patricia Vale did not believe in respect. She believed in management. Patricia was the HOA president of Briar Ridge Estates. She had perfect hair, a white SUV, expensive sunglasses, and the kind of voice that made "good morning" sound like a warning. She carried a leather folder everywhere, which I learned to treat the way ranchers treat rattlesnakes. Not always deadly, but never harmless. The first time she came to my gate, she did not ask about the tree. She asked about the view. "Mr. Keller," she said, "we're receiving concerns from premium lot residents about visual irregularities along the ranch boundary." I was standing by the gate with my dog Roscoe, holding a feed bucket, already tired of the conversation, and it had barely begun. Visual irregularities? She opened her folder and pulled out a printed notice. The older tree near the west ridge is deteriorated. It creates a negative impression from the walking trail and several high-value lots. I looked over my shoulder toward the witness tree. It stood exactly where it had stood before Patricia, before Briar Ridge, before the county paved the road, before half the people in that neighborhood were born. "You mean my oak?" "Yes, the dead-looking one." "It's not dead. It appears dead in several sections. Old things do that." She did not smile. "We would like you to consider trimming or removing it." "No?" She blinked. Not because she failed to hear me, because the answer arrived too quickly for her to decorate it. "No? No. Mr. Keller, residents paid a premium for these views." "They paid somebody who did not own the view." Her mouth tightened. "The association has a responsibility to preserve neighborhood presentation. On your side of the fence. The tree affects our side. So does the sun when it sets. Send it a notice." That ended the first conversation. It did not end Patricia. The letters started a week later. The first called the tree a deteriorated visual hazard. The second called it a possible safety risk, even though it stood more than 70 feet inside my fence and nowhere near their walking trail. The third claimed branches could fall during storms and create liability concerns for Briar Ridge. I sent back one reply through my lawyer, Rebecca Sloan. Rebecca handled ranch easements, boundary disputes, conservation agreements, and the kind of neighbor fights that usually began with someone saying, "It's only a fence." Her letter was clear. The tree stood entirely on Keller Creek Ranch. Briar Ridge had no ownership interest, no easement, no maintenance right, no visual control right, and no authority to enter, trim, remove, mark, damage, or interfere with it. She attached a survey. She attached the county parcel map. She attached an arborist report stating the tree was structurally stable for its age and did not threaten any HOA property. She also attached something Patricia ignored completely. The witness tree was listed on the County Heritage Tree Registry. It was not the same as a national landmark, but it mattered. The county had documented it years earlier because of its estimated age, size, and history tied to early ranch settlement in the area. Removing it without authorization could trigger serious penalties, restoration costs, and civil liability. Patricia responded with one sentence. "The association disagrees with Mr. Keller's interpretation." That was Patricia in pure form. She thought disagreement changed records. For months, she kept at it. She brought board members to the fence. She brought a tree consultant who stood on her side of the boundary taking photos. She sent residents an email about ongoing efforts to address unsafe adjacent vegetation. She asked the county whether a private tree, visible from an HOA trail, could be declared a nuisance. The county told her no, twice. The second letter from the county was short enough to be beautiful. No public nuisance condition has been identified. The tree is located on private property outside Briar Ridge jurisdiction. I framed that one in my mind. But Patricia never stopped. Then, in late June, Rachel invited me to spend 2 weeks with her family in Colorado. I almost said no. Ranchers are bad at leaving. Even when we have help, even when the fences are fixed, even when the cattle are checked, something in us believes the whole place might fall apart if we sleep in a different state. Rachel insisted. Dad, you haven't taken a real vacation since Mom died. I've taken time off. Going to the feed store after breakfast is not time off. I went. My hired hand, Luis, stayed at the ranch. Aaron, from Briar Ridge, promised to keep an eye on the west fence because he worked from home and could see the ridge from his upstairs window. Before I left, I walked out to the witness tree. I know how that sounds. Maybe foolish. Maybe sentimental. But old land makes you that way. I placed one hand on the bark and looked up into the limbs. There were a few dead branches, sure. There always were. But the crown was green. The trunk was strong. Cicadas hummed in the heat. A breeze moved through the leaves with that dry whisper live oaks make in summer. I thought of Laura. Then I went home, packed my bag, and drove north. For 6 days, Colorado was good for me. Rachel's kids dragged me to a mountain lake. My son-in-law grilled too much food. I slept better than I had in months. I even let Rachel take a picture of me smiling, which she said she needed as proof of life. On the 7th morning, Aaron called. I knew something was wrong before he spoke. His voice was too tight. Sam, are you sitting down? What happened? There's a tree crew at your ranch. My hand closed around the phone. Where? The oak. For a second, I could not speak. Then I heard the faint, unmistakable whine of a chainsaw through the phone. Aaron said, I'm recording. Luis is on his way, but they already cut 2 big limbs. Patricia is here with them. I stood up so fast, the chair scraped the floor behind me. Call the sheriff. I did. Tell Luis not to touch anyone. I already did. Then Aaron said the words I can still hear. Sam, they're cutting the trunk. I drove home that day. 14 hours. Rachel wanted to come with me. I told her no because I knew if she saw my face, she would drive faster than I needed her to. I called Rebecca from the road. I called Luis. I called Deputy Harris, who had handled ranch issues before. I called the county heritage office and left a message that was calmer than I felt. By the time I crossed back into Texas, it was dark. I did not go straight to the ranch because Rebecca told me not to arrive exhausted and angry in the middle of the night, with people possibly still there. Morning, she said. We go in clean. So I slept 3 hours at a motel outside town. At 7:15 the next morning, I pulled into Keller Creek Ranch. The first thing I saw was the stump. The witness tree was gone. I parked without remembering to turn off the engine. For a moment, I could not move. There are losses that feel loud. This one was silent. Too silent. The space where the oak had stood looked wrong, like someone had erased a person from a family photograph. Sunlight hit ground that had been shaded longer than I had been alive. The swing rope lay in the dirt, cut from the limb and tossed aside. Sawdust covered the grass. Deep tire tracks crossed the pasture. And there was Patricia, standing near the stump with 3 board members, a tree service truck, and a man in a hard hat. She looked relieved when she saw me. Not guilty. Relieved. Like she had been waiting to watch my reaction. Mr. Keller, she called. Before you become upset, you should know this was handled professionally. I stepped out. My boots hit the dirt. Aaron stood by the fence with his phone. Luis stood near the barn road, fists clenched, face dark with anger. Deputy Harris was already there, parked near the gate, speaking quietly with Rebecca, who must have beaten me by minutes. Patricia continued. The tree was an eyesore and a safety concern. The association acted after repeated warnings. I walked past her. Not toward her. Toward the stump. I put my hand on the raw cut. Sticky sap touched my palm. That almost broke me. Not in anger. In grief. I saw my father standing in its shade. Rachel flying on the swing. Laura laughing under the branches. My grandfather leaning against the trunk in a faded photograph from 1948. All gone, because Patricia wanted a cleaner view. Rebecca stepped beside me. Quietly. Sam. I nodded once, then turned around. Who cut it? The hard hat man raised his hand slightly. Benton Tree and Land. Who hired you? He looked at Patricia. Patricia said, the association authorized removal. Rebecca asked, did you provide them proof of ownership or permission to enter Keller Creek Ranch? Patricia said, the association had documented safety concerns. That is not what I asked. Deputy Harris looked toward the stump. He was not smiling. No one was. The tree service owner, a man named Dale Benton, began to understand what Patricia had not told him. His face changed slowly as Rebecca handed him the survey, the County Heritage Registry page, the prior warning letter, and the arborist report. He read the first page, then looked at Patricia. You told us the HOA had authority over the boundary tree. It was a hazard affecting the community, she said. It's inside his fence. The fence line has been disputed. Rebecca said, no, it has not. Patricia glared at her. Rebecca did not blink. Aaron stepped forward. I recorded them entering through the service gap behind the trail. Patricia told them Mr. Keller had refused to cooperate, but the board had approved emergency removal. Patricia snapped. You were trespassing by recording private association work. Aaron looked at the stump. Patricia, you were on his ranch. That was the first crack. People like Patricia do not fear being wrong privately. They fear being corrected in front of witnesses. Deputy Harris asked Dale Benton if he had written authorization from the property owner. Dale said Patricia had signed the work order as HOA president. Harris asked if Dale had verified the parcel. Dale looked down. No. That word sat heavy. No. No verification. No permission. No right. Just a check and a lie dressed as authority. Then the county heritage officer arrived. Her name was Marlene Ortiz, and she carried herself like someone who had spent years telling developers they could not bulldoze history just because it slowed down a driveway. She got out of her county truck, looked at the stump, and stopped walking. For a long second, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Oh no." That was when Patricia finally looked uncertain. Marlene walked to the stump and took photos. She measured the diameter. She photographed the saw marks, the remaining root flare, the tire tracks, the cut limbs stacked near the trailer, the entry point in the fence, and the old registry tag that had been nailed to the backside of the trunk and now lay bent in the sawdust. Patricia watched her. "What is this?" she asked. Marlene turned. "This tree was listed on the County Heritage Registry." Patricia said, "That registry is advisory." Marlene's eyes narrowed. Not for unauthorized removal tied to development, landscaping, or land use conflict. Especially after notice, Rebecca handed Marlene a folder. Prior notice, arborist report, county correspondence, survey, and the HOA's written complaints. Marlene took it. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. There it was. The second crack. The first was Aaron's recording. The second was a county official holding proof that Patricia had been warned. Dale Benton looked like he might be sick. "I didn't know," he said. Marlene looked at him. "You will need to provide all work orders, communications, authorizations, and payment records." He nodded quickly. Patricia said, "The association acted in good faith. I spoke then." My voice sounded strange to me. Low, too calm. "No, Patricia. Good faith is asking before you cross a fence. Good faith is reading the survey. Good faith is listening when the county says no. You waited until I was out of state and cut down my family's tree." She lifted her chin. "You ignored repeated safety concerns. The tree was not unsafe. Our residents disagreed. My arborist didn't. The tree was ugly. That word did it. Ugly. 100 years of shade, history, grief, and memory reduced to ugly by a woman whose only relationship to the land was the view from a walking trail. Even Deputy Harris looked at her differently after that. Rebecca placed one hand on my arm, not to calm me, to remind me that the law was now moving, and it was. By noon, the sheriff's report was filed. By 2 o'clock, the county issued a preservation order for the site, meaning no cleanup, stump grinding, grading, removal of debris, or further activity without inspection. By 4 o'clock, Rebecca sent litigation hold letters to Patricia, the HOA, the management company Benton Tree and Land, and every board member present. By sunset, Briar Ridge residents had Patricia's version in their inbox. Subject line: hazardous tree removal completed. She wrote that the association had acted to protect community safety after years of non-cooperation from an adjacent landowner. She said the removed tree had been deteriorated, unattractive, and potentially dangerous. She said claims of historical importance were being exaggerated for emotional effect. That email was the best gift she could have given us. Rebecca read it and smiled in a way that made me believe Patricia had just stepped into a hole and pulled the dirt in after herself. She called it unattractive after the county saw the registry tag, Rebecca said. Wonderful. Nothing about it felt wonderful to me, but I understood what she meant. Patricia had not just cut the tree. She had explained why in writing. Not emergency. Not imminent danger. Not storm damage. Appearance. Over the next 2 weeks, the value of Patricia's mistake became clear. First came the arborist. Not mine. The court-certified consulting arborist Rebecca hired for damages. He examined the stump, the cut limbs, photos, old reports, growth patterns, and the heritage registry file. He estimated the tree's ecological and replacement value using professional appraisal standards. When I saw the preliminary figure, I thought it was a typo. $742,000. That was before additional damages, loss of heritage value, unauthorized trespass, damage to pasture, legal fees, potential statutory penalties, possible punitive damages, restoration plan, soil remediation, replacement planting schedule, monitoring costs. By the time Rebecca finished adding the categories, she tapped the page and said, "This can cross $1 million." I stared at her. For a tree? For that tree. Then came the bat issue. Years earlier, a wildlife survey had identified the witness tree as a seasonal roosting site for a protected bat species. Not a permanent colony, but enough that trimming recommendations required seasonal caution. The old report had been in the county file. Patricia had ignored it. The county did not. A state wildlife officer requested records from the tree service, and the HOA. Dale Benton cooperated immediately. He handed over emails, texts, maps, the signed work order, and the payment receipt. That was how we learned Patricia had written. Proceed while Keller is away. Once the tree is gone, the complaint becomes irrelevant. That sentence changed everything. Up to that point, she could pretend she made a mistake. After that text, the mistake had motive. The board turned on her next. Not because they suddenly loved me, because self-preservation arrived wearing sensible shoes. 2 board members claimed Patricia had told them the county had approved removal. One said he thought the tree was on HOA common buffer land. Another said Patricia handled the details herself because the matter was time-sensitive. Then Mrs. Leary got involved. Every HOA has a Mrs. Leary. Older, organized, watches meetings, saves emails. Knows bylaws better than the people who quote them. She called me one evening. "Mr. Keller, did Patricia have permission to cut that tree?" "No." "Did the county approve it?" "No." "Did you receive any emergency notice?" "No." She paused, then said, "She charged us a special landscape enforcement expense." "How much?" $84,000. I closed my eyes. "For cutting my tree?" "For hazardous tree resolution, legal coordination, vendor work, and view corridor restoration." View corridor restoration. There it was again. The truth hiding inside fancy words. A homeowner meeting was called within 10 days. I did not want to attend. Rebecca told me to. Why? Because they need to see the person attached to the stump. I went. The Briar Ridge clubhouse was packed. Residents stood along the walls. Some looked angry. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked like they had already decided Patricia was the victim, because admitting otherwise would make their own board look foolish. Patricia sat at the front with two remaining board members and the HOA attorney. She opened with a statement about misinformation. That was always her favorite word when facts escaped her control. She said the association had acted after repeated safety concerns. She said the tree was visibly deteriorated. She said the ranch owner had refused to cooperate. She said the issue was now being exploited by outside legal interests. Then Rebecca stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She displayed the survey first, then the arborist report, then the heritage registry, then the county letters, then Patricia's email calling the tree ugly, then the text saying to proceed while I was away. By the time she read that last one, the room had gone cold. Proceed while Keller is away. That sentence did what no speech could have done. It put every homeowner inside the decision, not as spectators, as people whose dues had paid for it. Mrs. Leary stood. Did the board know the tree was on his ranch? Patricia said, the boundary has been a subject of concern. Rebecca said, no recorded boundary dispute exists. Mrs. Leary asked, did the board know the county had not approved removal? The HOA attorney leaned toward Patricia. Patricia did not answer. Mrs. Leary asked, did the board know about the heritage registry? Silence. Aaron stood then. I watched them cut it. I heard Patricia say Sam would complain, but it would be too late. Patricia's face went white. Aaron held up his phone. I recorded that too. That was the third crack, and this one ran through the whole room. People started talking at once. The HOA attorney asked for order. Mrs. Leary asked for the financial records. A man in the back asked whether insurance would cover intentional misconduct. Someone else asked if the special expense could be refunded. Another resident asked if Patricia's house could be liened the way she had liened people for unpaid fines. That last one was not legally simple, but I admired the creativity. The board voted that night to suspend Patricia from all authority pending investigation. She tried to object. Mrs. Leary said, Patricia, sit down before you make it worse. For once, Patricia did. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. Keller versus Briar Ridge Estates, HOA, Patricia Vale individually, and Benton Tree and Land. Dale Benton settled early. His insurance company paid part of the claim and then went after the HOA for misrepresentation. Dale sent me a written apology that sounded real. He admitted he should have verified ownership and said Patricia had pressured him to move fast. I accepted the apology, not because it fixed anything, because not every person in a bad act is equally bad. Patricia fought. For a while. Then discovery opened. Discovery is where confidence goes to meet receipts. We got emails, texts, board notes, invoices, photos, residents' complaints about views, Patricia's message to the landscaper asking if the tree could be removed before Keller returns. A message to a board member saying, once it's down, he can't force us to look at it. And the worst one, he is sentimental. The HOA cannot be governed by an old man's feelings. When Rebecca showed me that, I did not get angry. I just got tired. There is a special cruelty in people who dismiss memory because it is inconvenient to them. The mediation happened 6 months later. Patricia sat across the conference table with her attorney, no sunglasses, no leather folder, no white SUV visible through the window. The HOA's insurance representative looked like a man who had aged 3 years reading one file. Rebecca presented the damages. Tree appraisal, heritage value, restoration plan, trespass. Emotional harm tied to family use, punitive exposure, legal fees, wildlife compliance concerns, pasture damage. The first number was $1.3 million. Patricia's attorney nearly choked. The final settlement was confidential in exact terms, but I can tell you this. It crossed 7 figures. The HOA's insurance paid part. The HOA paid part. Patricia paid personally as part of the resolution. She resigned from the board permanently. Briar Ridge had to send a formal correction to all residents stating the tree had stood on private ranch property. The HOA had no authority to remove it, and prior communications had been incomplete. Incomplete. That word again. People love using small words to cover large wrongs. The county required a restoration plan, not to replace the witness tree. You cannot replace a tree older than your grandparents, but they required soil restoration, protection of the root zone, preservation of the stump site, and the planting of 12 native oaks across my ranch under supervision. Rachel came down for the first planting. So did her kids. We planted the first sapling near the old stump, not on top of it. Nothing belongs on top of it. My granddaughter tied a small ribbon around the young tree and asked if it would get as big as the old one. I told her, not while I'm here. She looked sad. So I added, but that's how trees work. You plant them for people you won't meet. She liked that. I think my grandfather would have too. Patricia sold her house the next spring. I heard the moving truck came early in the morning. Nobody from Briar Ridge filed a complaint about the noise. Mrs. Leary became HOA president, because sometimes the universe does apologize in its own way. Her first act was to remove every reference to view corridor enforcement from the community documents. Her second was to send me a handwritten letter. It said, "We cannot undo what was done, but we can stop pretending it was acceptable." I kept that letter. These days, when I walk to the West Ridge, the empty space still hurts. The sun hits the ground differently. The wind moves differently. The pasture feels too open there, like a room missing its roof. The stump is still there, weathered now. Darker. The raw cut has aged from pale yellow to gray. Grass grows around it. Sometimes Roscoe sleeps beside it. Sometimes I sit there with coffee and do nothing for a while. I think about my grandfather, my father, Laura, Rachel on the swing, the years that gathered under those limbs. Patricia thought the tree was ugly because she could only see it from a distance. That was her problem from the beginning. She saw views, not roots. She saw property values, not history. She saw an old man's tree and thought it was an obstacle. People like her believe beauty is something a board can approve. Straight lawns, clean trails, perfect sightlines, no rust, no dust. No inconvenient reminders that the land existed before the subdivision. But real beauty is not always tidy. Sometimes it leans. Sometimes it drops leaves. Sometimes it has dead branches, scars in the bark, and a rope mark from children who grew up long ago. Sometimes it stands there for nearly 2 centuries, holding the memory of a family that kept the land alive. And if you cut it down while the owner is on vacation, after every warning, after every letter, after every chance to stop, then do not act surprised when the stump becomes evidence. Patricia called it an ugly old tree. The county called it a heritage oak. The arborist called it irreplaceable. My family called it the witness tree. And the settlement papers called it $1 million mistake.